and Nancy have always been interested in how I've become who I am, and I think all of you understand from hearing what you did that I am, very much in process, as we all are, and that who I am today is not necessarily who I will be tomorrow. And I just really am trying to continue to figure out this life I'm leading. I guess one of the things that I've done, and then I'll just read something, is to use the life that I've lived as an object of meditation, to think about its relevance, but not its relevance to me necessarily, because that would put me into a solipsistic moment, and that's not what my work is about. And thank goodness that isn't what my work is about. Otherwise, there would be rather too much of me, in the work. I'm always interested in figuring out how the work will be relevant to other people. But Eddie once asked me how I became a Southern Italian American writer. And so I wrote this. During World War II, just after Italian Americans are seized and incarcerated, my family and I, although I am not yet born, not yet conceived, stop being Italian, or rather stop showing as far as they can, insofar as this is possible, that they are Italian. So that while I'm growing up, difficult as this may be to understand, the subject of my ethnicity is never raised in our household. I am not born Italian American. I do not become Italian American until years later. I will skip my adolescence, during which I am not aware I'm Italian, though I do know I have a strange grandmother who wears black headscarves. I will skip grammar school and high school, during which the only Italian person mentioned is Christopher Columbus, during which I do not read a work of literature written by an Italian, much less an Italian American, during which I do not learn about Italian history, during which I do not study Italian, during which I do not learn about the incarceration of Italians during World War II, the seizure of their houses and fishing vessels. I will skip college and graduate school, during which I do hear about the Renaissance and painters like Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo, but do not register them as Italian. And so I do not identify with them, do not see their accomplishments as being especially significant to me. During graduate school, I do know that in one journal written by Virginia Woolf, she wonders how these great masterpieces could have been fashioned by descendants of the obviously tasteless, shiftless, despicable Italians, and I recoil, but only momentarily, for she is a great woman, and I am only a woman thinking about writing her life. Italy would be a very nice place, she as much as said, without the Italians. And do you know that there is no record, and Mark, you have to check this for me, okay. There's no record, not one, of her eating pasta when she was in Italy. And this is the woman on whom I spent many, many years of my working life. I will also skip the early years of my marriage, even though the man I married was Italian American, and the early days of our courtship involved eating great quantities of pizza. Remember? How much pizza we ate? We had no money, so all we did was eat pizza and drink Coca-Cola. So here I am now in the 1980s, and I am on the telephone talking to Jane Marcus about Virginia Woolf, and the conversation goes something like this. It would be interesting, Jane says, to have someone from a working class background like yours write an essay about Virginia Woolf for a book I'm editing. Working class, I say? For at this time, living in a very nice house in a very nice town, I do not think of myself as working class, do not think about my parents as working class, although I had told Jane about my family's work. Thus begins my education in class, a prelude to understanding my Southern Italian ancestry. After my first essays about Virginia Woolf, Sarah Ruddock asks me to write an essay for Between Women, a book she and I are editing. It's published as a portrait of the Putana as a middle-aged Woolf scholar. This is the first time I see myself as Italian American. This is the first time I out myself as Italian American, as if they didn't know. I am startled by the reception this small essay, you might call it a memoir, receives. Startled that people like it, that they think it brave. This is the piece that almost wasn't, for I ripped it into pieces after completing it. This before computers, and there was no carbon copy. My husband fished it out of the garbage, remember? and forced me to piece it together, and there it was. My life as a memoirist, my identification as an Italian-American almost wasn't. My life as a memoirist, my identification as an Italian-American starts here, with me piecing together, at my husband's insistence, what I had written and erased, or rather written and riven, a piece that was my first attempt to speak in my own voice about who I thought I was, and that voice was, I am told, an Italian-American voice. Years later, I have avoided writing memoir, though I have been approached by a fancy editor to write one, but the subject, the editor tells me, has to be the mafiosi in my family. This is a very important publishing house, I might add. I decline. I am, I recall, incensed. Sometime later, Rosemary Ahern, then an editor at Dutton, asks me to write a memoir. She wants to publish a memoir by an Italian-American woman. She knows my Putana essay. I say yes, not because I want to write my life, but because I have another book, Conceived with Malice, that I need to find a home for. Tit for tat, I tell her, publish Conceived with Malice, I'll write the memoir. Vertigo, the homework assignment that made me a memoirist, that catapulted me into the world of Italian-American letters, that changed my sense of self, that established for me the fact that, yes, I was Italian-American, almost wasn't. By now I have met Edvija Junta, Eddie. I don't quite remember how. You'll remind me someday how we met. It was
Voices in Italian Americano, special issue on
it was the
women.
Italian Americana special issue.
1996.
Vertigo was not yet even in page proofs.
Sorry, 1995.
1995. Vertigo then was in page proofs by
Yes.
the end of 1995. I remember a visit to her home in New Brunswick. I remember sending her Vertigo. I remember reading her work. I remember being led by her to other Italian-American writers and historians, to the emerging discipline of Italian-American studies. I see her building community without Eddie, without her work, who knows? One of those accidental, or perhaps not so accidental, meetings that change lives. Next, Jennifer Guglielmo asked me to write a piece for her book, Our Italians White. I don't have much time. I'm working on another project. I don't know anything about the subject. So I do what I've always done when I don't have much time and I want to write for someone. I pick something very small, my grandmother's naturalization papers, and see where it will take me. I haven't even looked at them, but when I do, a revelation. There is an entry listing my grandmother's complexion. One entry for color, white, another entry for complexion, dark. But I noticed that the picture of my grandmother affixed to the page shows her not to be dark at all. What can this mean, color white, complexion dark? Why is she called dark? This is the beginning of another stage of my education, trying to answer this question, which leads me to my learning about the South, to my writing Crazy in the Kitchen, about my Southern Italian forebears. During this writing journey, I learned that my grandparents came from Puglia, that my grandmother, or rather my step-grandmother, for my birth grandmother died during the flu epidemic, is from Rodi Garganico on the Gargano Peninsula, that my grandfather is from Viesta, also on the Gargano Peninsula. Learning this, where they came from, is an event of tremendous moment for me, for I never knew we came from the South, never knew we were Pugliese, Puglia, a place never mentioned in my household. Once I do ask my grandmother where she came from. Rudagan, she says. Rudagan, a place I don't know, can't conceive of, a dialect for a place on a map, Rodi Garganico, a village, a universe, a world. In trying to unlock my grandparents' pasts, I read scores of books about the Southern Italian diaspora, which some people call a migration, although it was not. I stumbled upon one book which unlocks my grandfather's life for me, Frank M. Snowden's Violence and the Great Estates in the South of Italy of Puglia, 1900 to 1922. Because of this book describing the brutal lives of people working the farms in Puglia and their mistreatment, I can begin to imagine my grandfather's life. In reading Violence in the Great Estates in the South of Italy, I learned what has been denied me. I learned what I don't know about these people who are my forebears. I learned what being Southern Italian means. More specifically, I learned what being poor and a farm worker and pugliese means during the beginning of the 20th century. I learned so much about what I did not know. And as I've said to my students more times than I can remember, the tricky bit about writing memoir, at least the way I do it and the way I invite my students to do it, is that you learn everything that you need to know about the people who have died after they're dead. And so you're left with this enormous sense of having gotten a great gift of understanding what had happened to them, but also of the great, and I'm going to use the word tragedy, and I'm going to use it deliberately, the great tragedy of not being able to empathically share with them what they might have told you had they been able to or had the courage. So that you're now imbued with the sense of who these people were, if these people were all gone. And I think if there is that great loss that underlies my work, it is this, that everything that I learned about my people that I needed to know, I learned after they vanished. And so, in one sense, my entire life's work has been chasing the ghosts of my forebears, and as a people who came to the United States, as any child of the diaspora, of any diaspora, understands, what we all have are simply ghosts of the past, and that's the best that we could do. And the challenge also is that although we learn about it, we never really learned I have never really learned what being Southern Italian meant to my grandparents. Only my grandfather and my grandmother, who did not write of it, who could not write of it, or they could not write, who did not speak of it often, or they could not speak of it, knew what it means, what it meant. All I can do, all I have tried to do, is to accord them the respect of imagining what it must have been like for them, of remembering what I do not and what I can never know. And I think that's probably the crux of my work, that I try to remember what I do not and what I can never know. The shape of this poor man's life, who when he was a little boy hoped one day someone of his blood could go to school. The shape of this poor woman's life, my step-grandmother, who came to America to marry a man she did not know and who would never love her.